Need to push. Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's better. Hi. Thank you for being like everyone is here. It's kind of crowded, but thank you for being here. I'm Marine Doux. I'm the co-founder and marketing director at Médianes. We are a French-based consultancy and media organization that helps media leaders to grow sustainable organization. Today we're going to talk about a topic that is really close to our hearts at Médianes. It's about managing newsroom, and especially how to better manage and how to really engage with new generations, all the new rules, and especially in a media landscape that is already and continue to evolve on an everyday basis. How we're supposed to do as media leaders, as as a newsroom especially, but also how we can explore strategies, opportunities, and how we can face all the challenges that happens in a newsroom on an everyday basis. Joining me today, I have the luxury to have amazing individuals. To my left, I have Clémentine Forissier. Also from France today. She's a co-founder and managing editor of Contexte. Contexte is a rapidly growing B2B publication that has a presence both in Paris and in Brussels. To my right, I have Anup Kaphle. Yes, he is the editor-in-chief of Rest of World. It's an international publication that focuses on the impact of technology aside the Western bubble. And to my right, I have Federica Cherubini, Director of Leadership Development of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. Federica, she's going to start the panel today because I think we all need some key principles and key guidelines to not only to grow your newsroom, but also what are the strategies, the principles that can help cultivate a better and a healthy newsroom culture. So Federica, help us out here. What are some key elements that can contribute to a positive work environment, and also what we can do to align with the needs and expectation of younger audiences?
Thank you so much, Marine, and it's great to be here with such a great panel. So at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, we are part of the University of Oxford, and you might know us for the Digital News Report, where we track changes in audience news consumption. But the part I work on is about leadership development activities, which really means creating safe and confidential spaces for newsroom leaders to figure out three things on three levels. One is, how is the news media landscape changing? What's the role of your organization in that landscape? And what's your role as a leader within your organization and within the landscape? So we do a lot of gatherings with newsroom leaders to really try to help them solve some of these challenges and finding some key principle. Before I get to the key principle, I think what is interesting is probably looking at what are the main challenges. I'm going to put aside all the problem about sustainability and a changing landscape, because there is a lot of panels around there, and I guess if we're here in this room, we all know that is a challenging environment. But I think that part that is relevant for us is that it's navigating, leaders have to navigate constant change. And there isn't really a secret recipe hidden somewhere that someone hasn't found yet. It's about figuring out that recipe and keep evolving. So as newsroom leader, I think what is difficult is providing the guidance and the leadership of setting a direction with balancing it with admitting that we also don't know exactly where we're going because we have to remain agile and keep evolving with the landscape. Within that, I think specifically, we got to the realization that in many other industry, when you become a manager, especially a manager of people, it's assumed that that's a sort of specific skill set. And I think in journalism, there is a bit of the assumption that, a lot of career progression works that you're a fantastic reporter. At some point, you get a promotion. The promotion means here's a team and here's people to manage. Go on. And of course, in a lot of pressure of environment funding around us, that kind of becomes a second shift, because often that's not just your job to managing a team. You also have an editorial role or a business role or product role to do, and on the side you do a second shift of managing people. We take a lot of time, resources, emotional resources. So I think 3 key themes or key principles that we can probably start laying out, and then a lot more to discuss. I've taken them from an annual report that we do every year called Changing Newsrooms, where we try to look at 3 buckets of issues. One is how the ways of working are changing. We started this into 2020. You can imagine the topic that was very much about remote working and having distributed teams and shifting everyone working from home, then bringing some people back in the newsroom, and so a hybrid newsroom. And I think right now really the issue is around flexibility and really making sure that we can balance the individual needs of the people in the team with the need of the team and of the organization, and how to walk that line between making sure that the flexibility helps with balancing better the personal lives and the work lives of staff, mental health, well-being, with keeping an organization running, making sure that a team spirit and a bonding sense of being part of the team is maintained by having some in-person contact. So all of that is one area. The second area is very much we look at as a diversity, but I think really through the lens of inclusivity and representation. So it's not just about having diverse teams, but really making sure that that is something that adds value to the discourse and to the conversation. And so really how to make sure that it's not just about pipeline and bringing people into the door, but then really changing the culture of the organization and making sure that those those views really add value and are heard, and voices are heard in terms of representation. And then the third part is really about talent. And that part that I was mentioning in the beginning, also like a second shift of people management, is that really recognition that time to do that, the space to do proper management takes time. And I don't think any one of you has extra hours in the day just laying around. So for that to be done properly, something else needs to move out of your plate. And so really thinking about how to delegate, how to create good communication structure in an organization so that there is no space for misunderstanding or time loss in misunderstanding. And I think what is interesting that we see a lot at the Reuters Institute is that one is a time for management, but also as newsroom leaders who set the tone for the culture of the organization, is also giving yourself the space to think and to really figure out what's coming next, what are the big problems. And again, in a very already packed day with a lot of things to do and a lot of competing priorities, how do we make sure that organizations and leaders have time to manage, but also for leadership and for thinking and strategic leadership in that sense? So I think I'm sure more to unpack in this.
Thank you, Federica. We often hear both from, I think, established and emerging media organizations that the industry is already hard enough to find some time to be flexible or to adapt, especially to younger generation needs. How can we explain to them or maybe reassure them that it's going to help them actually?
I don't think it's a choice, really. The thing that the industry, the journalism is an industry based on talent. If we don't realize that we have to make the space for talent to thrive, we're not going to be left with much. Obviously, content producing journalism is crucial, is why we're here. But that is done by humans. Maybe also by machine, but these days. But also the core of what is the value of the organization is the people that bring the talent, and so I think is really actually a key to sustainability key for the future is that I think what helps a lot that we don't really talk about enough is something really not very sexy, which is operational structure, like a clean operations that help you thrive, which is sort of that, I don't know, I don't think we spend enough time really thinking about how the infrastructure around you really helps you sustain the organization and the people within it.
And when you talk about operational support, it's not only like to have process and organization and how to, it's also to have time for the managers or to actually manage people.
Yeah, I mean, every manager should have a one-on-one with their team. Well, that depends on how many people you manage, how many times you get to do that in a week. If you manage 4 or 5 people, that's already a chunk of time. Then there are crucial team meetings, like a lot of time we spend in meetings. For example, to me, one review is really looking at the meetings that you have in your calendar and figure out which ones are strategic and important, which ones are not. And because we spend a lot of time also just sitting through meetings because they've always been in the calendar, they're there, and so in that sense of the operation process is about, to me, making sure that you do what you need to do and have the courage of saying, well, probably this is not urgent, is not necessary, maybe I can delegate to someone else, or maybe we can skip this meeting if we have a very good updated document that helps us do the asynchronous work. Then when we meet for the meeting, we discuss the things. It's very small things, but communications, how many newsrooms have half of the communication going through Slack, the other one comes through email, some comes from WhatsApp, then someone sends you a Telegram message. Is there an actual policy about what is urgent? We talk so much about mental health and well-being. Do we know that if it's urgent, I'll call you on I'll write you on WhatsApp, and so if you don't see a message on WhatsApp, you can be off. But if there isn't that hygiene of making the rules, then you have to be connected all the time. And when you're off, you use your WhatsApp and you inundated by just normal workflow conversations. So I think a lot of it is really cleaning up processes intentionally.
And not only for these younger generations, also for ourselves.
Completely. And I think you mentioned the younger generation. A lot of I think is about managing expectations and having honest and open conversations about what are the expectations, and agreeing on that and finding a middle ground.
I can't agree more with you. I think like we both have like to have in mind that the talent and how to manage people, it's really key, but it's not only sometimes to revamp your whole organization, but also sometimes it's some practical tips, communication rules, to have some time off, and also to like make some room to manage. What I have also in mind is not only sometimes the human argument that helps media leaders, it's also that's going to help your organization to thrive, actually to grow. And I think that one of the key examples I really love especially to talk about is Contexte. Because for those who don't know Contexte, Contexte has been created 10 years ago. And in France, especially a lot of younger generation comes to Médianes asking us like, okay, where are the key media organizations that we need to go now to work and to have organization that understands also that we all want a work and personal life, like in our life, actually. We want to have balance, we want to have flexibility. And what I think is really interesting at Contexte is 10 years ago, you already had some opportunities to really create a different organization, but also it's something that is not one day you wake up like, oh, I need to change my leadership management. Can you maybe explain like, what are some key challenges that your organization have faced, and maybe how your corporate culture and management style has emerged, because it's not something, again, that you like this.
No, it was not like this. Maybe just a few words as an introduction, because I think that many challenges we have are because we're French, and maybe I will say things that will surprise non-French in the audience. Let me share you just an anecdote. in December, you know, this is the period of the annual assessment. So I had to I needed some feedback because I wanted to do a meeting with my editor-in-chief who arrived 9 months before. So I asked the team feedback on her work. And I asked a journalist who arrived in our company a year ago to give me feedback. And her manager, because I'm not her direct manager, told me, okay, she's very uncomfortable with your question. She doesn't know how to do it. And I was not surprised. I was just a bit, I mean, not sad, but I offered this journalist to help her to think about the feedback, but she didn't dare to say to me that she was very worried at saying something about her boss, and so she didn't do anything. So that's an example of how difficult it might be for French people and for French journalists to do feedbacks. And she didn't say anything to me because I'm the boss of the newsroom, and in France, most of the time, feedback equals judgment, and you don't judge your boss because maybe something wrong can happen to you if you do that. So, and it's very important, you know, these kind of little examples are very cultural. You know, we live in a very hierarchical country, and it's ingrained in people. So it's difficult when you need to change the culture. And something else, we have a very heavy heritage in France regarding to media, because if you think about our media landscape, most of them are, you know, owned by industrialists whose main activity is not information at all, and they don't have really vision for their venture, and so it's difficult for and they don't have vision for the people in the media. So it's difficult for journalists because they are not, you know, very at the core of the project of their company. So again, if you need to change the culture, and if the boss don't really care about your part of the organization, it's not easy for them. So that was just an introduction, but I think it's important for you to know that. As Marine said, at Contexte, things have emerged gradually. I mean, in 2013, with Jean-Christophe Boulanger, who is the CEO of Contexte, we knew we wanted to launch a media, and at that time we talked about ethics. So we wanted to be very ethical, but we didn't talk about culture. And if I just speak about myself for a moment, so the year before we launched Contexte, in 2012, I wasn't sure I wanted to join the project because I knew it was, you know, when you launch a media, it's a lot of energy. So I wasn't sure I wanted that for myself at that moment. So I met many people in Paris, and for, you know, as you do when you're looking for a job. And I met very, very good journalists, but I was not attracted by their organization, and I didn't know why at that moment. It was not clear to me, and it has become clearer and clearer over time. And now I know why. It's because I didn't really see why, you know, what was the purpose of the organization. I mean, of course, producing good content, of course, but the organization itself didn't have a real project for the democracy. And then let's talk about culture. So we launched Contexte in 2013. We were 9 of us, 5 journalists. Now we are 110 of us, 51 journalists based in Paris and Brussels. And we are focused, you know, we are B2B media. We're focused on producing content for professionals. We're talking about politics. Our goal is to help them to anticipate what's going to happen in terms of public policy in their fields. And when you cover politics, your day potentially never ends. you can receive a call from an advisor of a minister at midnight every day or in the weekend. And if you're a good journalist, you want to be the first one to publish, the good news. But of course, working all the time is not possible in the long term. And I'm sure you've noticed that, but young journalists will not accept any more things that we accepted when we started to be journalists 20 years ago. I mean, they're not going to accept to work 24 hours a day. They're not going to accept to work in very hierarchical newsrooms. They're not going to accept to work sometimes in even violent environment, because newsroom can be very violent sometimes. But since COVID, we're not only talking about young journalists. I mean, a majority of journalists, regardless of their age, don't want their work to dominate their lives. So we have a challenge that is, the challenge of every journalist we have in our newsrooms. But still, we want Contexte to be a sustainable company. I mean, with people happy to work there and who wants to, develop themselves in our newsroom. And we want to produce high quality information. So how can you do that? I think that I can say now, but I mean, it was really gradually, so that we've been driven by two principles. We want to protect our independence, because Contexte is 100% independent. We have no external shareholders. Our economic model is only subscription from our readers. So we want to protect our independence, capitalistic, financial, and editorial. That's the first principle. And the other one is that we want to empower employees. And when I say that, I said we want to provide them with autonomy, to foster subsidiarity. I'm sorry if it's a bit jargon. The idea is that the people closest to the ground is maybe the people that can make the best decision, because he knows what he's talking about. And we want to collaborate with them to develop a culture based on values and rules that promote a healthy work-life balance. That's, to be schematic, the two main principles we have. So that's how we have developed our company for 10 years with many, many difficulties, I would say, but but maybe I can develop later.
Thank you, Clémentine. What I think is interesting with Contexte is like you both also adapt to the media landscape in France, not only like key principle you read online, like, oh, we need to do this and this, but also I think sometimes it also depends on what you're working on, especially I think politics and policies. Sometimes, like we have, as a B2B publication, that information is key and is exactly the good that you want to have and to sell literally to some of your clients. And also I think for journalists, we all been trained to think our work not only as work and as it's not like it's not just a job, it's a passion. And I know that, for example, in France, this is something super strong, and even in journalism school, people try to change this mindset, because most of the time it's really toxic, because some people just think they're going to work and work and work all day and they are going to deserve more at the end, and sometimes they just don't. So what I think is really interesting is like you also take this into your organization, the fact that you are going to have like journalists that really want to be experts in their domain, but also how you help them to take some also distance. Thank you, Clémentine. Another international publication, but Anup, you're going to explain to us, because you already have some challenges, because you work in the US, but also all over the world. So it's not only about flexibility, it's about having people elsewhere and how to adapt with many cultures and many styles of work. Like how how do you face these challenges, and also what are the key principles, because you have some interesting ones.
Yeah, so I think I'll tell you a little bit about the rest of the world just because it's important. We are a nonprofit publication that launched in 2020. We're based in New York, but majority of our team is actually based outside the West in countries that we cover, right? And a lot of how I envisioned operating rest of the world is born out of my own experience as a journalist who experienced management in Nepal, where I first started working. I'm a Nepali. And in the US, I worked for a lot of traditional newsrooms. I was at The Atlantic, I was at The Washington Post, I was at BuzzFeed, and then going back to Nepal to run a newspaper called the Kathmandu Post, and then again coming back to New York to launch this startup, right? So I think like how we are set up is really kind of like, based on the ethos of rest of the world, which is not only do we want to cover countries outside the West and experiences of people outside the West, we want the people who are telling these stories to come from those places, right? So we're not kind of like deploying foreign correspondents or like parachute journalists from the West to go and like tell these stories. So who gets to tell these stories is really important to us. So from the start, February 2020, when I moved back to New York, right before COVID, who knew it was gonna be like an utter shit show? I don't know if I'm supposed to curse. And so we wanted to sort of like set up this thing as an international operation where we were hiring people in those regions, which basically meant that as a small startup, we had to figure out how do you hire people in India, how do you hire people in Nigeria? There are laws, there are systems, right? And so how do you support that infrastructure? Obviously, COVID-19 kind of like, made everything extremely difficult. So we did what we had to, which was kind of like, all right, let's hire the people we can find wherever, which was primarily mostly in the US. At that point, it was very hard to figure out like who was where because people are dealing with their own trauma, right? So we were hiring whoever we could get to just kind of like start building a proof of concept, start doing the journalism. And then I think like, over the next 2 years, we gradually sort of like refined the process and we started building these teams where we have a reporter, say in Bangalore, right? And you have their editor based in India somewhere as well. And that is where the ideas originate. That is where the first editing happens. And then we have top editors that are based outside of there with a bit more experience who can kind of like, guide the narrative of the story and then complete the story. And we built systems such as fact-checking and copy editing because we were really leaning on these local journalists to tell stories for a Western audience, right? And I think like, my own experience from working in newsrooms is oftentimes you are told how to write a story about your own country, and that is something we didn't want to do. But also like, we wanted to make sure that the story was, and how do I say this without kind of like, sounding like a jerk? Because the Western standards are kind of like held as the creme de la creme, like in journalism, right? Because you write a certain way, you think about ethics, and then different countries have different styles of writing. Inverted pyramid, you bury the lead, like all sorts of stuff. And we wanted to make sure that everybody was telling story in the same singular voice. And when you have all these people who come from all different cultures and all different styles of journalism training, doing that for a singular publication, it is the hardest thing to do. So we had to build systems that supported that. So in part, we're kind of like, we're part journalism school, part teaching hospital, part a full-fledged publication. And our system is built to support that, which means on certain days it feels like utter chaos. And then there are days of glory where we celebrate our wins, right? But and as like a nonprofit, like I wouldn't really say there is kind of like a corporate philosophy that kind of underpins how we operate, but I would say there are two things that guide how we operate. One is flexibility, and I think like COVID-19 taught us that being flexible is paramount, whether it is about how you ask people to file stories, right? Like whether it's about the benefits that you're offering them, with the parental benefit or like a bereavement leave. There are things that you learn as you build a new company, because again, like people come from different cultures, and like allowing them to take days off during certain holidays. How does that work when you actually have to publish every day in New York at 6 o'clock, for a Western audience, because consistency matters, right? So flexibility is super important. I think we try to be as flexible as possible as an operation. And the other thing is transparency, which is something that you were talking about. I think like flexibility and transparency go hand in hand. And I think when we talk about transparency, it's important to think you can't kind of have a very flat decision-making thing, because at the end of the day, it is still an organization, and an organization has to function. Decisions have to be made. There is a bar for excellence, bar for quality, right? But what you can do is set the expectations very, very clearly. Define people's roles, set the expectations, tell them what the expectation is, tell them what the deadlines are, and then kind of let them operate. I'll say we've made a lot of mistakes, in the past 4 years, but we've also sort of learned tremendously from it, and I'll share some of the challenges as we continue. But I would say that the flexibility and kind of transparency are top of my mind as I think about running the newsroom.
Thank you, Anup. And what I like also about what you just told, it's that you can make mistakes every day. It's not like a pure science. It's about human individuals, and sometimes you have these written principles that are the guideline of the organization, but also most of the time you have to deal with this. How can you manage to have the rules of the organization, and how you can still try to also be flexible with these rules?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just say very practically, because sometimes we beat ourselves thinking how can we be perfect? Right? How can we be that organization that, the Neiman Lab or Ben Smith is never writing about, right? Because there are problems in every newsroom. Honestly, sometimes when I look at the problems in newsrooms where I've worked, or I open up Axios, or I read Semaphore, and I see, oh my God, that sounds like a disaster. At least I don't have that problem, right? And I think you have to think about what makes sense for your newsroom. And you can try to borrow from the Times, you can try to borrow from BuzzFeed, you can try to borrow from a small sort of local organization. But at the end of the day, you have to think about, okay, who are the people who work for you? And for me, like I said, everything kind of boils down to a bit of my own experience. I think a lot about culture. We talk about culture. I have editors who are born and raised in Nigeria, who've never worked in the US or never written for a Western publication, right? Same goes for editors in Mexico and India, and we've just hired an editor in Bangkok. But I realized when we have these meetings, the way people communicate is so different. If you're from the US, you're kind of vocal. You're you know how to sort of talk about your desires, what you want. If you're from India, or even me, I'm the editor-chief of the publication, and I have sometimes I lack confidence in how I want to sort of present my own vision or talk about decisions. And I think about that a lot. So how do you really empower people who are coming from all these different cultures to say, hey, this is my vision, or here's what I was going for when I was editing a story a certain way? Because what I've learned as a manager, as an editor-in-chief, is to question and say hey, this doesn't work. Why did you do it this way? And what I'm hoping for is a genuine kind of answer of this is what I was going for, but not everybody can convey that to you. So creating sort of an environment and a system that allows them to be able to express themselves is really important. And I think about the culture building aspect a lot as we build the newsroom.
It's super interesting, because I think you think of this because you're also an international publication, but sometimes you don't have to be in international publication to think about this. Just try to be inclusive, because sometimes you think, oh, we all come from the same job, or we have this organization, and you have to fit in. And for me, especially for younger generation, you have a growing demand just to be more inclusive and more to be aware, and just sometimes be empathic. And I don't know, maybe Federica.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing, which I think both what Clémentine and Anup said. I think I was talking about clean and lean processes and operations. Of course, that's the basis, right? On itself, that won't deliver anything. It's the intentionality and the awareness of building culture and stopping and asking yourself, is this the right process for my newsroom at this time? The flexibility of saying, yes, it is for now, maybe something will change and we'll revisit. I think what is difficult in newsroom is that there isn't that much time, right? Because you're always quick, fast, covering something, then moving on. We don't really have a culture of what product teams would do, and I do a retro, like going back and say like, okay, how did it work? How was it? What worked? What didn't? Which then really helps you inform how you do things next time. And sometimes we do it for projects, we will do it for elections, we will do it for like big moment and you have to do like specific coverage, but we don't do it enough for culture, communication, small little things.
And I think like, I think you have to kind of like figure out what you need to prioritize as a newsroom, because there are 24 hours in a day, right? People work for like 8 to 10 hours. And as you said, like, young people are very good about saying like, actually I'm off now, right? I'm not gonna respond to you until 9 a.m. tomorrow. I work 17 hours at the Washington Post, right? And I like, when I think about it, like I cringe now. I don't know how I was able to do it, but I also felt pressure. Like people come with all kinds of pressure. For me, the pressure was like, oh my God, I'm on a visa. What if I get fired? I'll be deported, right? Like that drove me for 10, 12 years of my life. And that's why I functioned like that. So you always have to like, I try to think about, I said this to an editor the other day, okay, you can't apply the same level of ambition and excellence for everything, because then you're just gonna end up being very, very frustrated. So you have to help people prioritize, what is more important. And I like talking about like what is okay just being good enough and what needs to be excellent, right? And sometimes you just have to be okay with good enough, because not everything is going to be excellent.
I think this is my favorite expression this year, the good enough, because we exactly have the same situation at Médianes. Like everyone wants to be so perfect because we help media executives, so we want to help them. And sometimes it's just like the end of the day, you're like, yeah, this is great, this is already good for the time you had, and you need to sometimes just to be aware of the expectation, but also, yeah, it's great. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's hard. Right?
I say that as like someone whose therapist calls me a perfectionist, but I've had to sort of develop that in myself.
Just one thing, because you talked about management and how and that it is a role, and I think that's a very important thing that in our company, and it's not easy to find managers. We've decided that managers don't have to write, and we wrote, the role, and so they have 5 roles. They are editors, of course, they are organizers, they are animators, they are entrepreneurs, and they are leaders. And for each role, we wrote what it means for Contexte. And then we try to find some spaces like seminars or like, I don't know, meetings where we can, analyze what we've done, and was it good or not, why, and not only, and we're not only talking about editorial stuff, but also about our culture, our communication system. I mean, about the framework we've tried to draw. So that people in this framework, with those processes, can feel free to act, to decide, to do their job properly.
I think we all need this copy of this document, maybe to to have this. We wanted to have for the last part of our session some practical and some tips, because sometimes we just say it's about like your culture, what you want to do, like your vision, what is your value proposition on an everyday basis, and all these principles and guidelines needs to be like to start with you and with your team, but also we wanted to share some concrete examples of initiatives or policies that have been particularly helpful and successful in improving, or at least helping a little with work-life balance and also employee satisfaction, because we talked about talent earlier. It's also how you keep your team and how you're not like every day changing the team because everyone is exhausted. I don't know who wants to start with like something super helpful that we can implement on an everyday basis.
Maybe I can have one suggestion, and then I wanna hear from the newsrooms. We talk about younger generations, and I think there is also not necessarily super younger, not necessarily someone who's entering the newsroom right now. I think some traditional newsrooms have a very hierarchical structure, a very process, very clear defined process, often defined in the past. Also, how do you progress through the organization, like roles, etc. I think one of the things we've been seeing is that there are a lot of digital new roles, jobs that didn't really exist 5 years ago, that are crucial competencies from newsrooms to keep up with changes and trends. Often the people in these roles don't really, no one has done their job before, right? So they're tasked with figuring out the job, but also for themselves thinking, what's my next step? And not often newsrooms are thinking about, well, maybe there isn't because someone hasn't done it before. But if we don't think about what is a career progression, if everyone they see at the decision-making table has a very different profile from them because of a very maybe older, old school kind of profile, which is fine. I'm not absolutely advocating that everything needs to be changed and some traditional skills and expertise aren't useful, the contrary. But that awareness of thinking about what are we offering to someone in the newsroom as progression, which is one of the motivators maybe for people to stay in a company, to see themselves growing in the company, to form that culture that is very, specific and keep evolving. Like every time you had someone new into a team, the cultures change, right? Culture is so intangible, it's very difficult. So I like the idea of like writing down some of those specifics to call them out, and then much of it comes to life by how people behave and how they do it. So some ways, for example, is just really thinking about, okay, these new competencies we're bringing in, very crucial on helping the organization, especially traditional organization, evolve with the needs of an evolving digital landscape. Where are they going next inside the organizations? So it's really thinking about some of those practical steps that maybe are not front and center, they're not urgent, but then, for a generation that is very like value driven, that feels very much a need of like self-actualization and progressing, even if there isn't necessarily a promotion or a raise that you can give them because funds are, resources are constrained, just the ability of thinking, and this is how you learn, right? Maybe it's a secondment in a different team. Maybe it's a reverse mentoring scheme where they can get paired with someone else in the newsroom, someone more experienced with a different skill set, so that really the idea is not just the young learns from the old or vice versa. Is really about learning from each other and seeing things with different eyes. Could be a way to do it.
Super interesting. Anup, if you have something to add.
I'll just, I'll present a couple of things in terms of how I think I have evolved as a manager, right, which has helped me kind of like, manage the newsroom. I think about this concept of the dance floor versus balcony. I don't know how many people have heard that before. I did this leadership seminar at Pointer a couple of years ago. But, during year 1, year 2, or even like in my previous sort of like jobs, I was very kind of like, involved in everything. I cared about the headlines, I cared about the lead, I cared about the nut graphs, I cared about the images, all of that, right? And I think like, you start realizing that it is not really helping people and sending like mixed signals. So I think about this concept of being on the balcony and watching the dance floor versus actually going and dancing on the floor all the time. And I think like, as you hire more people, you want to make sure you're empowering them, and that concept has really helped me. And the second thing kind of like, goes along with that, which is, I think about the definition of a manager a lot. I have, in the past 4 years, I've read more books about leadership and management than I have on like nonfiction, which is my favorite genre. I keep sort of like, seeking some of these things because you're trying to learn. You're trying to sort of like, evolve your thinking of what leadership is. And I think like the thing I've found most helpful is the job of a manager is not to manage people, it's to manage processes and lead people. And I think about that a lot, like whether it means finding opportunities for people who report to me to go to conferences to speak on panel or go do a leadership seminar, right? Or to sort of like, take a project that they've never edited before and sort of, bring that to life. And then just like final thing, which is, this is the root of like all problems or success, is like hiring for the role, not for people. I think there are a lot of like institutions that make a lot of mistakes because you're hiring superstars because you think that will lead you to success, but you really should be thinking about what is needed in the newsroom, what is required in that role. Otherwise, that will get messy really quick. So I'll just present those three lessons.
I'm like amazed with the fact it's not only, it's mostly about like how you create rules and guidelines, but also like how do you lead, and the difference between maybe assign roles and say, oh, this is right, this is not right, etc. But also like how you also give motivation, but also support on an everyday basis. Thank you, Anup. Clémentine.
Yes, it's funny because when you were talking, I was thinking about a book I read last year called Radical Candor. I don't know if you've heard about this book, but it's very interesting about management. So, and it comes to my first point is that you can, as a manager, you can get inspiration from I mean many places. And I read a book, another one who. Really, turned my beliefs upside down. It's Reinventing Organizations from Frédéric Laloux. And for sure, if you haven't read this book, you should do it. Train yourself, see other leaders, discuss about your problems, and it's very helpful. And of course, we don't train managers in newsroom, and it's a big mistake. So for sure, you have to train your managers. I think that the culture is a concrete application of the value of your company. So you have to write them down, you have to think about them, and do it with your team, and the people have to know them very clearly so that they can implement the culture every day. Write everything down. Yes, of course, because if you're five of us, if you're five people in your company, it's okay. You can just talk to each other all the time. But if you're 20, 50, 100, it's impossible, and it's very important to have a clear framework so that people can refer to this framework to know what to do. And just maybe I would have many examples, but one of them with regarding the idea of writing down everything. When people arrive in your company, please just onboard people. Even if they are 20 years, they have been journalists for 20 years. When they arrive in your organization, they don't know anything. And last month we had the chance to have a new journalist, and she's been a journalist for 15 years. And when she arrived, I said to her, okay, maybe maybe you think you know everything, but I know it's not true, and it's okay, and we're going to support you, and we're going to help you so that you can learn how it goes here, our processes, our editorial guidelines, etc., etc. And we wrote a very specific dashboards for her I don't know 6 first months, so that she can know where she goes, and it's very important.
I really want to see that dashboard and to just to copy it. I just wanted maybe to really insist on the communication process, because you mentioned it earlier, Federica, and the fact that also as a manager, and when you leading a newsroom, leading a team, to explain also when people can communicate with you, where, how they can say, like when they have like an urgent matter, what they can do, when they have something that you can read on another day, where they can put this information, and also to write that down, all this principle. And you say like, oh, when you 5 people, sometimes it's okay, it's true that you can still like talk to the people or send a quick message. But I remember when we launched Médianes like 3 years ago, we wanted to be like in different towns, and I remember like, oh, we need to write down everything because we are going to forget everything while we'll be developing the company. And it's true, like sometimes it's super clear at the beginning, but while you're growing, sometimes you just lose sight of some of the key principles. But also it's super helpful because you just gain so much time on an everyday basis. And I think the write down everything is super useful, and especially as a manager, be transparent and explain sometime when you're not, like, oh, I can say you something. I can say to you this, but I can't say you that. And also to have all this process that sometimes you don't have, especially when you're an emerging team, you don't have like this HR support, or you don't have like this kind of training, but just to talk with each other. I think this, what was really important for us with this panel is to say that we have like difficulties every day in our organization, and most of the time we don't know, but the fact that
Our manager says cut off.
Yeah, okay. Or great managers. So please talk to people, talk to everyone, and if you have like great stories to share, please come to us at the end of the session, because I think we all need to talk more about management. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for coming.